In the darkness of the forest, a rich man abandons his own daughter, leaving her at the mercy of fate. But a crow, a silent witness to the cruelty, decides that the truth cannot be buried, seeking help where least expected. The night air of the forest swallowed the sound of the rich man's hurried footsteps, leaving behind only a heavy silence and the faint cry of a baby. The tiny creature, wrapped in a silk blanket that cruelly contrasted with the damp earth, stirred in her makeshift basket, a desperate whimper that no one, except the trees and the darkness, seemed to hear. Perched on a high oak branch, the crow, with plumage darker than night, watched. Its eyes, black and glistening pearls, captured every detail of the scene: the man's calculated haste, the child's fragility, the cold and deliberate abandonment. It wasn't the first time the crow had witnessed the world's cruelty, but there was something different about this act. Such pure innocence left at the mercy of invisible predators, hunger and cold. An unusual spark ignited in the bird's ancient mind. It wasn't just instinct, it was a dark understanding of injustice, an echo of its own loneliness that resonated in the forest's soul. The crow tilted its head, an almost human gesture of contemplation. The baby's cry, once a distant lament, now seemed to pierce the night's stillness, a call demanding a response. What could a crow do? Its role was that of observer, of reaper, not of savior. But the image of that helpless little being, so oblivious to the evil surrounding it, awakened something deep. A decision, as improbable as it was courageous, solidified in its mind. The truth could not be buried beneath dry leaves and oblivion. With a powerful and silent beat of wings, the crow took flight. Not to hunt, not to hide, but to seek. Its keen senses scanned the landscape below, a dark tapestry dotted with shadows and whispers. It needed a sign, a light, a sound that wasn't of the forest. It flew higher above the tree canopy, where the air was colder and the view wider. It was then that it saw it. A patch of yellow light, distant, moving slowly along the winding road that snaked along the forest's edge. A truck. They were rare in those parts, especially at that hour. The crow dove, the wind whistling through its feathers. The light grew, revealing the vehicle's massive silhouette. Inside the cabin, Elias, a middle-aged truck driver with stubble and the tired eyes of someone who spent more time on the road than at home, fought against sleep. Loneliness was his constant companion, and old country music on the radio was the only sound besides the rumble of the engine. He was kilometers from any town, on a little-used route, when a dark shape suddenly landed on his truck's hood. Elias blinked, rubbing his eyes. An illusion? But the shape remained. It was a crow, large and imposing, looking directly at him through the windshield. The bird tapped its beak on the glass once, then again, with an insistence that was unnatural. "What's this then, bird?" Elias murmured, surprised. Never had a bird acted that way. He slowed down, curiosity overcoming his fatigue. The crow cawed, a hoarse and urgent sound, and then took flight, flying a short distance ahead of the truck, looking back as if expecting Elias to follow. Elias frowned. "What are you calling me for, little bird? I don't have any bird seed for you." But the crow repeated the movement, flying and looking back, its unwavering persistence. There was something in those black eyes, an intensity that unsettled him. A strange feeling, almost a premonition, began to form in the truck driver's chest. It was madness, of course. But what if it wasn't? The loneliness of the road sometimes made room for the inexplicable. With a sigh, Elias lightly turned the wheel, following the direction the crow indicated, entering a secondary trail he didn't even know existed. The crow flew ahead, a guiding shadow in the darkness, leading the truck driver to a destination that would change both their lives forever. With a sigh that carried the weight of years of loneliness and skepticism, Elias lightly turned the wheel. The truck, a giant accustomed to smooth asphalt, shuddered as it entered the secondary trail, little more than a track of beaten earth and loose stones. Low branches scratched the bodywork with a screeching sound, and the engine groaned in protest, as if sharing its driver's disbelief. "This is madness, Elias," he murmured to the empty cabin, his eyes fixed on the dark shadow flying ahead. The crow, with its plumage darker than night, seemed to float between the trees, occasionally landing on a closer branch, turning its head back, as if checking if Elias was still following, before taking flight again. With each beat of its wings, a strange certainty solidified in the truck driver's chest. It wasn't just any bird. There was an intention, an urgency in those movements. The headlight's beam barely penetrated the forest's density, transforming the path into a tunnel of dancing shadows. The air was colder there, laden with the damp smell of earth and decaying leaves. Elias gripped the wheel, feeling the truck sway over the uneven terrain. With every meter traveled, civilization seemed more distant, and the feeling of entering something inexplicable grew stronger. "What do you want to show me, creature?" he asked, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. The crow didn't answer, just continued its aerial dance, a silent and relentless guide. Elias thought about stopping, about turning back and resuming his usual route, forgetting the strange apparition. But the image of the crow's black, insistent eyes stopped him. There was something there, something that called him, that compelled him to follow. The loneliness of the road, which sometimes made him question his own sanity, now pushed him into the unknown. The trail began to narrow even further, making it impossible for the truck to continue. The crow landed in a small clearing among the twisted roots of a century-old oak, and tapped its beak on the ground a few times, looking at Elias with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Are we here, then?" Elias turned off the engine. The silence that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the distant croaking of a frog and the rustling of leaves. He grabbed his flashlight and got out of the cabin, feeling the night's cold penetrate his clothes. The crow remained on the branch, watching him. With the flashlight in hand, Elias swept the light across the clearing. There was nothing unusual, just trees, bushes, and darkness. "I don't see anything, little bird," he said, feeling like a fool. But then, a faint sound, almost inaudible, pierced the silence. A whimper, a cry. Elias froze. His heart quickened. It wasn't a sound of the forest. It was human. The flashlight's beam trembled in his hands as he directed it to the spot where the crow had landed. And there, on the damp ground among the exposed roots of an ancient tree, was a makeshift basket. A lump formed in Elias's throat. He approached slowly, the sound of the crying becoming clearer, more desperate. The light revealed the basket's contents, a small silk bundle, cruelly contrasting with the dark earth, and inside it, a baby. Elias's eyes widened. It was a girl, tiny, with her face red and wrinkled from crying, her fists clenched, stirring in her blanket. A wave of shock, disbelief, and cold anger hit him hard. Who would do such a thing? Who would abandon a helpless child in the middle of the forest at the mercy of the night and its dangers? He knelt, the flashlight falling from his hand and rolling to the side, illuminating the baby's face with a trembling light. The child's cry seemed to pierce his soul. Above him, on the oak branch, the crow watched in silence, its black eyes fixed on the scene, as if its mission was finally accomplished. The truth now was revealed. The child's cry, once a distant lament, now echoed in the clearing, a pure and desperate sound that tore through the night's silence and Elias's soul. The truck driver knelt, the flashlight trembling in his hand, its flickering light dancing over the girl's red, wrinkled face. She was so small, so fragile, a handful of life abandoned to the mercy of cold and darkness. The silk blanket, so out of place there, seemed to mock the cruelty of the act. "My God." Elias's voice came out as a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible. He extended a trembling hand, hesitating before touching the tiny being. The warmth radiating from the baby's body was a miracle, a faint flame fighting against the biting cold of the forest. The girl's eyes, still closed from crying, opened for an instant, revealing a deep blue that hit him like a blow. A wave of shock, disbelief, and cold anger hit him hard, choking him. He felt the lump in his throat tighten, a mixture of horror and compassion he hadn't experienced in a long time. The loneliness of the road had hardened him, but the sight of that helpless innocence broke down the barriers he had built over the years. The flashlight slipped from his hand and rolled to the side, illuminating the baby's face with a flickering light. The child's cry seemed to pierce his soul, an urgent call demanding a response. Elias, still kneeling, extended his hand again, this time more firmly, and gently touched the girl's damp cheek. Her skin was soft, delicate. The crying subsided a little, turning into broken sobs. He picked her up carefully, leaving the makeshift basket behind. The girl was surprisingly light in his arms, a small burden that suddenly seemed the most precious thing in the world. He cradled her against his chest, trying to transmit some warmth, some security. "Hush, little one," he murmured, his voice choked. "I'm here now. You're safe." The baby smell, a sweet and soft mixture, filled his nostrils, contrasting with the damp smell of the forest. He rocked her gently, and the crying, little by little, gave way to whimpers and finally to a fragile silence, broken only by the child's soft breathing. She opened her eyes again, fixing them on Elias's. They were eyes of such a deep blue that they seemed to carry the vastness of the night sky. Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. There was an intelligence, a curiosity, even in those young eyes. He slowly stood up, the girl nestled in his arms. The anger he felt over the abandonment now mingled with a fierce determination to protect her. Who was the monster capable of such cruelty, and why? Elias's mind began to race, trying to find answers, but the only certainty was that this child needed him. The crow, from the top of the oak, let out a low caw, almost a whisper, and took flight, circling once over the clearing before disappearing into the forest's darkness. Its part was done. The seed of truth had been planted. Elias looked in the direction where the crow had vanished, a mix of gratitude and perplexity in his gaze. "Thank you, my friend," he said, his voice full of an emotion he couldn't name. He returned to the truck, the girl still in his arms. The driver, once a solitary and skeptical man, now carried the weight and hope of a new life. As he entered the cabin, the smell of diesel and old coffee seemed inadequate for the purity he held. He carefully laid her on the passenger seat, using his thickest coat as a makeshift cradle. The girl, exhausted, closed her eyes and fell asleep, a small sigh escaping her lips. Elias sat behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine. His eyes scanned the forest's darkness, then returned to the child's sleeping face. The loneliness that had accompanied him for so many years had been broken in a way he never could have imagined. A life had been saved, and his own irrevocably had changed. The truth about that child's abandonment still needed to be uncovered, and Elias knew that, somehow, he was now intrinsically linked to this quest. He couldn't just hand her over and move on, not after finding her like this, guided by a crow. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Elias didn't feel alone. The silence in the cabin, once a constant companion, was now filled by the soft breathing of the little one on the passenger seat. He watched her, the thick coat serving as a makeshift cradle, her face serene in sleep. It was an image that seemed to belong to another world, not his. Elias started the engine, the familiar rumble of the truck sounding strangely loud in the new context. The headlights cut through the forest's darkness as he maneuvered the giant back onto the main trail. Every jolt of the vehicle was felt by him, who drove with an unusual delicacy, as if the truck now carried something more fragile than any cargo it had ever transported. Elias's mind was a whirlwind. The anger over the abandonment still simmered, but it was mingled with an unexpected tenderness. He, a man who had spent most of his adult life in the loneliness of the road, who avoided ties and responsibilities, now held a tiny, completely dependent life in his arms. The irony was brutal. And the crow. The crow. How would he explain that? Who would believe it? "You're not real, are you?" he murmured to the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see the bird's shadow there. But there was only the darkness of the forest he was leaving behind, and the light of the headlights illuminating the path ahead. With every kilometer, he drove away from the clearing. The reality of what had happened solidified. He couldn't just take the child to the nearest police station or hospital and say, "A crow guided me to her." It would be ridiculous, unbelievable. He would be seen as a madman, or worse, as a suspect. His eyes returned to the girl. She was so helpless, so innocent. He felt a tightness in his chest. He needed to protect her, not just from the cold and hunger, but also from the bureaucracy and skepticism of the world. He needed a plan. He needed to take her out of that hostile environment. He needed a safe, warm place where he could think. His mind flew to his small house, a simple, solitary refuge on the outskirts of the nearest town, a few hours away. It was the only place where he felt truly at ease, and now it seemed the only place where the girl would be safe with him. "Let's go home, little one," he said, his voice softer than he remembered using in years. "Let's go home and we'll figure this out together." The dirt road gave way to asphalt, and the truck resumed its usual speed, though Elias drove with redoubled caution. The smell of diesel and old coffee in the cabin seemed less inadequate now. It was the smell of his life, and that life had just been turned upside down. He thought about the child's father. Who could he be? What kind of monster would abandon his own flesh and blood? The image of the rich man and his daughter, which the crow had witnessed, was still hidden from Elias. He only had the image of the child, an abandoned angel. The hours dragged on. The sun began to emerge on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the darkness of the night he had faced. The girl still slept, a miracle of resilience. When he finally arrived at his house, a small wooden construction with a rusty porch, fatigue weighed on his shoulders. He turned off the engine, and the silence returned, but now it was a different silence, full of promises and uncertainties. Carefully, he picked up the sleeping girl in his arms. Her weight was a constant reminder of the new reality. He opened the door of his house, which smelled of dust and loneliness, and entered, closing the outside world behind him. The small living room with its worn-out sofa and old television seemed strangely empty and at the same time full. He laid her on the sofa, covering her with a clean blanket he found in the closet. The girl grumbled a little but didn't wake up. Elias sat in a nearby chair, watching her. His eyes scanned her delicate face, her long eyelashes, her small lips. He felt a wave of protection so strong it frightened him. He wasn't a father. He wasn't a hero. He was just Elias, a solitary truck driver. But now, he was all the child had. The truth about the abandonment was still shrouded in mystery, but Elias knew he couldn't rest until he uncovered it. He couldn't just hand the girl over and forget. There was a story there, an injustice, and he, for some inexplicable reason, had been chosen to be a part of it. The crow had done its part, and now the responsibility was his. He picked up the phone, hesitating. Who to call first? Who to trust with this unbelievable story? The journey to uncover the truth was just beginning. He picked up the phone, the heavy, familiar device in his hand, but his fingers hovered over the buttons, motionless. Who to call first? The journey to uncover the truth was just beginning, but the first barrier was the highest, the truth itself. A crow guided me to her. The phrase echoed in his mind, and he almost laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. No one would believe him. He would be institutionalized, or worse, seen as a suspect. The image of himself trying to explain to a skeptical police officer or a social worker with a pitying look was unbearable. He couldn't risk the girl's safety, nor his own credibility, with such a fantastic story. He put the phone down, placing it back on the hook with a heavy sigh. No, not now. First, he needed to think. He needed a plan. And above all, the girl needed him. His eyes returned to the sofa. The tiny creature slept deeply, the clean, slightly rough blanket wrapped around her minuscule body. She seemed so fragile, so oblivious to the whirlwind she had unleashed in his life. Elias approached, kneeling beside the sofa. Her breathing was soft and rhythmic, a sound he never imagined hearing in his silent house. Elias's house was the epitome of masculine, solitary simplicity, a worn sofa, an old television, a coffee table with old magazines, a compact kitchen with the essentials. There wasn't a single toy, a baby bottle, a diaper. The reality hit him hard. He had nothing to care for a baby. "What do I do now, little one?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. The girl's hunger and thirst would be the first to manifest. He needed milk, diapers, clean clothes. He couldn't leave her alone to go to town. The responsibility was overwhelming, but the wave of protection he felt was even greater. He stood up and began to walk around the small room, his mind in a frenzy. He had some canned food, water, coffee. But for a baby, nothing. Suddenly, the loneliness that was once a refuge now felt like a prison. He stopped in front of the window, looking at the sun that was already high in the sky, illuminating the dust dancing in the air. The forest, now bathed in light, seemed less threatening, but the memory of the night, the cold, the crying, was still fresh. The image of the crow hovering over the clearing returned to his mind. What did it want? Why did it choose him? Elias shook his head, trying to push away the unanswered questions. What mattered now was the girl. He decided that he needed help, but not official help. He needed someone he trusted, someone who could understand the urgency without questioning the madness. His thought flew to Maria, the owner of the small general store on the roadside, about 30 minutes away. She was a woman of few words, but with a big heart, who had known him for years. She wouldn't ask unnecessary questions, or at least wouldn't ask them aloud. He needed a plan to get there. He couldn't take the girl in the truck, exposed to everything, and he couldn't leave her alone. The only solution was quick and desperate. Elias grabbed a clean sheet and tore it into strips, improvising a kind of sling. Carefully, he picked her up from the sofa, nestling her in his arms. The girl grumbled but continued sleeping. He tied her to his body, firmly but gently, like a kangaroo. It was awkward, but she was safe and close to him. "Come on, little one," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "We'll get what you need." He grabbed the truck keys and left, locking the door of his house. The morning sun seemed brighter, the air fresher, and the world somehow more real and more dangerous. He got into the cabin, the girl nestled against his chest. The smell of diesel and old coffee now mingled with the sweet aroma of baby, a strange fusion that defined his new reality. As he drove along the dirt road, the truck swaying gently, Elias began to think about the next steps. He needed supplies, yes, but he also needed information. Who was this child? Who abandoned her? The journey to uncover the truth was just beginning, and Elias knew that, to protect her, he would have to dive into a world that he, a solitary truck driver, never imagined existed. He had no idea where to start, but the determination in his heart was unshakable. He would do whatever it took. With the girl nestled against his chest, Elias started the truck's engine. The familiar rumble was a comforting sound, but the presence of the tiny life in his arms transformed every vibration, every curve of the road, into an act of extreme caution. The smell of diesel and old coffee, which was once the essence of his loneliness, now mingled with the sweet and subtle aroma of baby. A strange fusion that defined his new reality. The dirt road leading to his house was uneven, and Elias drove slower than ever, his eyes fixed on the path, but his mind on Maria. She was the only person he could think of who might not judge him, who might help him without asking too many questions. Maria, with her grey hair always pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that saw more than they said, was the owner of the small general store on the roadside about 30 minutes away. She had known him for years, knew of his solitary routine, his aversion to complications. "She's going to freak out," Elias murmured to the sleeping girl, who grumbled softly in response. "But she'll help, she always helps." With every kilometer he drove away from his house, Elias's anxiety increased. How would he explain? "I found a baby in the forest." That was already difficult. "A crow guided me to her." That was impossible. He needed a version of the truth that was credible enough to get help, but wouldn't put him under suspicion. The image of the girl, so innocent and vulnerable, was his shield and his motivation. Finally, the familiar silhouette of Maria's general store appeared on the horizon. It was a simple, faded green wooden building with an old gas pump and a small porch where Maria used to sit on warm afternoons. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. He parked the truck a little further away, in the shade of a large tree, so that the girl wouldn't be immediately exposed. He got out of the cabin, the girl still attached to him by the makeshift sling. The feeling of her body against his was strange, but also incredibly protective. He took a deep breath and walked towards the store door. The little bell on the door jingled when he entered, announcing his arrival. Maria was behind the counter arranging canned goods. She looked up, a gentle smile beginning to form, but which froze on her lips when she saw Elias's awkward figure and the unusual bulk on his chest. Her eyes widened. "Elias? My God, what is that?" Her voice was a shocked whisper. Elias felt his face flush. He approached the counter, trying to appear as calm as possible, which was almost impossible with his heart pounding. "Maria, I need your help." Maria came around the counter, her eyes fixed on the small head that was now revealing itself a little more. Is that a baby? Elias, whose child is that?" She looked like a statue, hand on her chest. "I found her, Maria, in the forest. Abandoned," Elias said, his voice hoarse with emotion and fatigue. He couldn't lie completely, but he also couldn't tell the whole truth. "She was alone, in the middle of nowhere. There was no one around. I couldn't leave her there." Maria approached, extending a trembling hand to touch the blanket. Her eyes, which were once filled with shock, now filled with a deep sadness. "Abandoned. My God, poor little thing." She looked at Elias, a mix of astonishment and admiration on her face. You brought her here." "I didn't know what to do, Maria. I couldn't take her to town, not with my story. No one would believe me. I would be a suspect. And she needs things, milk, diapers, clothes. I have nothing at home." Elias's voice was a desperate plea. Maria, who had always been a practical woman, seemed to compose herself. She looked at the girl, then at Elias, and a spark of determination lit up in her eyes. "Of course you couldn't leave her. You did the right thing, Elias. What do you need?" She turned to the shelves, her mind already working. "I have some things here. Powdered milk, maybe. And diapers, yes, I have some my niece left. I need everything, Maria. Everything a baby needs. And I need you not to tell anyone. At least for now. I need time to think, to figure out what to do." Elias knew he was asking a lot, but the trust he had in Maria was the only thing holding him together. Maria looked at him, her eyes meeting his. There was a seriousness in her gaze that Elias recognized as a vow of silence. "You know I can't promise that forever, Elias, but for now I understand. Come, let's go to the back. I have some things that might work." She guided him to a small pantry at the back of the general store, where she kept extra supplies. Elias felt immense relief, but the journey to uncover the truth was still just beginning. He knew that Maria was just the first step, and that the path ahead would be long and full of dangers. But with the girl safe in his arms and the unexpected help of an old friend, he felt a new strength. The makeshift sling had slipped a little, showing the serene face of the sleeping girl, her long eyelashes resting on her rosy cheeks. Is that a baby? Elias, whose child is that? She looked like a statue, hand on her chest, disbelief etched on every feature. "I found her, Maria. In the forest. I couldn't lie completely, but I also couldn't tell the whole truth about the crow. Her eyes, which were once filled with shock, now filled with a deep, almost maternal sadness. Abandoned? My God. You brought her here. I would be. I would be a suspect. You know how it is, and she needs things. I have nothing at home." Elias's voice was a desperate plea, laden with a vulnerability Maria rarely saw in him. Maria, who had always been a practical woman with a sharp, protective instinct, seemed to compose herself. The initial surprise gave way to compassion and logic. "You did the right thing, Elias. What do you need?" She turned to the shelves, her mind already working, assessing the stock. "Powdered milk, maybe? And diapers, yes. I have some my niece left when she came to visit last month. At least for now. I need time to think, to figure out what to do." Elias knew he was asking a lot, that the situation was explosive, but the trust he had in Maria was the only thing holding him together. She knew Elias's reputation, the solitary man of the forest, and knew that any involvement with the police would be a nightmare for him, especially with such a bizarre story. A child. This is serious, but for now I understand. She guided him to a small pantry at the back of the general store, where she kept extra supplies and personal items. The place was a labyrinth of boxes and shelves, but Maria moved with familiarity. "Here, take this box. We'll put everything here." She began to rummage, pulling out a can of baby formula, a pack of small diapers, a little cotton romper that looked new. "My niece left these. She grew so fast." Elias felt immense relief. A weight momentarily lifted from his shoulders. Maria's help was a beacon in the darkness of his uncertainty. While Maria filled the box, he watched the girl, still asleep in his arms, her chest rising and falling gently. Her fragility was a constant reminder of the enormous responsibility he had assumed. "I need more than this, Maria," Elias said, his voice firmer now. "I need a crib, or something similar. And maybe a thermometer, basic baby medicine. I don't know what else she might need." Maria nodded, thoughtful. "That will be harder to get without raising suspicion, but let's think. For now, take this, and come back tomorrow. I'll see what I can discreetly arrange to get. I have a friend with young grandchildren. Maybe she has something she no longer uses." Elias thanked her, gratitude overflowing in his eyes. The journey to uncover the truth was still just beginning, and he knew that Maria was just the first step, and that the path ahead would be long and full of dangers. He picked up the box full of supplies, and, with a nod of his head, left the general store, the little bell jingling again, announcing his departure into an uncertain future. Elias picked up the box full of supplies, its reassuring weight in his hands, and with a nod of his head, left the general store, The little bell jingled again, announcing his departure into an uncertain future, but now with a clear purpose. He walked back to the truck, the girl still nestled against his chest, the warmth of her tiny body an anchor amidst the storm of his thoughts. As he entered the cabin, the forest's darkness was already beginning to swallow the twilight. He placed the box on the passenger seat and carefully adjusted the girl in his arms before starting the engine. The dirt track leading to his cabin seemed longer and more winding than ever. Every jolt was a worry, every shadow a reminder of the danger the child had faced and what she might still face. He arrived at his cabin, a rustic and solitary refuge, which now seemed small and inadequate for the new life he was bringing. The smoke from the chimney, which was once a sign of his own reclusive existence, now seemed an invitation to the outside world. He got out, the box of supplies in one hand and the girl carefully protected in the other arm. The wooden door creaked when he opened it, revealing the dark interior, illuminated only by the faint twilight entering through the window. With the help of his flashlight, Elias lit the kerosene lamp, and the yellowish light filled the small room. The smell of wood, earth, and dampness that always comforted him now seemed empty. He needed something for the girl. Quickly, he grabbed a large wicker basket he used for firewood, lined it with a clean, soft blanket that Maria had included in the box, and gently placed the girl inside. She grumbled a little, but didn't wake up, her tiny fists clenched near her face. Elias sat in his rocking chair, exhausted, but with his eyes fixed on the child. What was he doing? A man like him, accustomed to the solitude and silence of the forest, now responsible for such a fragile life. He opened the can of powdered milk, following the instructions with an almost painful concentration, and prepared a small bottle. When he offered it to the girl, she opened her eyes, blue and curious, and began to suck with a voracity that broke Elias's heart. She was hungry, very hungry. While the girl drank, Elias thought about the crow, that mysterious bird that had guided him. Where was it now? Had it completed its mission? Elias felt a strange connection with the creature, a silent bond of shared responsibility. The crow not only led him to the child, but also propelled him onto a journey he never imagined. After feeding and changing the girl's diaper, an awkward task, but performed with the utmost care, Elias placed her back in the basket. She fell asleep again, a deep and peaceful sleep. Elias stayed there, watching her, his heart heavy with the promise he had made to himself and to Maria. He couldn't simply raise the girl in secret forever. He needed to find out who her parents were, why she was abandoned. The truth. The cabin, once a sanctuary of peace, now seemed like the headquarters of a secret mission. Maria was the first step. The next would be to investigate, discreetly, without raising suspicion. But where to start? The forest was vast, and the man who abandoned her had vanished without a trace. Elias knew the night would be long, full of vigil and thoughts. He was a man of the forest, accustomed to deciphering signs and following tracks. Now, he had a new kind of trail to follow, one that led not to an animal, but to a dark truth, for the girl, for the crow, for justice. The cabin's silence was broken only by the child's soft breathing, a constant reminder of his new and daunting responsibility. Elias remained in his rocking chair, the creak of the old wood a counterpoint to the gentle rhythm of the girl's chest in the wicker basket. The kerosene lamp, now almost out, cast long, dancing shadows on the rustic wooden walls, making the familiar space seem strange, charged with an unknown energy. He watched her, a small bundle of innocence, completely oblivious to the storm she had brought into his solitary life. Her tiny hands were still clenched in fists, her lips slightly parted. He had never held a baby before, never imagined such a delicate weight in his calloused hands. The act of feeding her, of changing her diaper, had been awkward, almost comical, but driven by an instinct he didn't know he possessed, a primal urge to protect. His gaze drifted to the window, where the last vestiges of twilight had yielded to the impenetrable darkness of the forest, the same forest that had almost claimed this fragile life. And then his thoughts turned to the crow. Where was it now? The question echoed in his mind. The bird had guided him, had shown him the way, a silent and somber sentinel of destiny. Elias felt a strange, almost mystical connection with the creature. It wasn't just a bird, it was an instrument, a catalyst. Not only had it led him to the child, but it had also propelled him onto a path he never would have chosen, a path full of unknowns and dangers. "Poor creature," he whispered, his voice hoarse in the silence. "What did they do to you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. He couldn't just keep her there, hidden, not forever. Maria was right. A child was serious. He needed to uncover the truth. Who were her parents? Why did they abandon her? The image of the rich man, with his luxury car and his cold gaze, returned to his mind. That man was the key, he knew. But how to find him? How to prove what had happened without seeming like a madman, a kidnapper? Elias ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble and the fatigue that weighed in his bones. He was a man of the forest, accustomed to deciphering signs, to following animal tracks, to reading nature. But this was a different kind of trail, one that led not to prey, but to a dark and dangerous truth. Maria was the first step, the bridge to the outside world, the only person he trusted, but he couldn't burden her, nor put her at risk. He needed to be smart, discreet. The cabin, once a sanctuary of peace and seclusion, now seemed like the headquarters of a secret mission. Every object, every shadow, seemed to observe the girl in the basket, waiting for his next move. He stood up, walking to the rustic table. He picked up a piece of paper and a pencil, something he rarely used. He began to scribble, trying to organize his thoughts. 1. Care for the girl. Top priority, ensure she is safe, fed and warm. Maria can help with more supplies. 2. Investigate the abandonment. The car, he remembered its make and color. It was an expensive model, unusual on those roads. The man. His image was etched in his mind, his face, his clothes. The exact location, where the girl was left. Was there anything else there? 3. Protect himself and the girl. Avoid the police for now. The Crow story would be ridiculed, and he would be the main suspect. He looked at the list, feeling a knot in his stomach. It was a monumental task, but when his eyes returned to the girl, sleeping so peacefully, a new wave of determination washed over him. For the girl, for the Crow, for justice. The night would be long, full of vigil and thoughts. He sat down again, his gaze fixed on the child. The cabin's silence, once a companion, was now an accomplice, guarding the secret he had brought from the heart of the forest. He was a man of the forest, and now a guardian, and guardians do not rest until the truth is revealed. The cabin's silence, once a refuge, became a stage for Elias's vigil. The creak of the old rocking chair was the only sound that dared to break the quiet, a counterpoint to the gentle rhythm of the girl's breathing in the wicker basket. The kerosene lamp, now almost out, cast long, dancing shadows on the rustic wooden walls, making the familiar space seem strange, charged with an unknown energy. Elias watched her, a small bundle of innocence, completely oblivious to the storm she had brought into his solitary life. Where was it now? What did they do to you? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Not forever. Maria was right. Who were her parents? Why did they abandon her? But how to find him? Suddenly a faint cry broke the silence. The girl stirred in the basket, her tiny lips trembling. Elias started, his heart racing. He approached, awkward, and picked her up in his arms. She was warm, and the crying increased, transforming into a hungry wail. It's okay, he murmured, his voice softer than he ever thought it could be. He rocked her, feeling her small body against his. Quickly he warmed some of the milk he had prepared and offered the bottle. The girl gripped it eagerly, her small blue eyes fixed on his, a trust that disarmed him. As she drank, Elias felt an even deeper connection. It wasn't just a mission, it was a bond. After feeding her and changing her again, with a little more dexterity this time, he placed her back in the basket. She fell asleep almost immediately, her face serene. Elias returned to his chair, but now the exhaustion seemed less important than the new strength he felt. He had a purpose. With dawn approaching, tinging the horizon with a pale grey, Elias knew he couldn't delay any longer. He needed to act. The first step would be to revisit the abandonment site, to look for any detail that might have gone unnoticed in the haste and shock. And then he would need to speak with Maria again. She was the only bridge to the outside world, the world from which the girl had come and to which the truth needed to return. The journey would be dangerous, but he was not alone. He had the girl, the crow in his thoughts, and a silent promise of justice. The pale grey of dawn deepened into shades of pink and orange, painting the sky over the treetops. The cold morning air invaded the cabin, bringing with it the damp smell of the forest. Elias watched the girl, now awake and with curious eyes, following his movements. She babbled soft sounds, a sweet contrast to the heavy silence of the night. He picked her up again, feeling the warmth of her small body. The idea of leaving her alone in the cabin, even for a few hours, was unbearable. The forest, however familiar, was full of dangers. "I can't leave you here, little one," he whispered, stroking her fine hair. The only option was to take her to Maria. Her house was a considerable distance away, but it was the safest place he knew. He prepared a small bundle with the girl's few things, a clean blanket, the bottle, and some milk. With the girl nestled in a thick blanket and secure in his arms, Elias locked the cabin, an act he rarely did, and set off. The walk along the narrow trail was slower with the child. Every step was cautious, every shadow an alert. The sun began to filter through the leaves, creating a play of light and shadow on the forest floor. The bird's song was the only sound, and Elias felt a strange peace despite the urgency in his heart. He looked at the girl, who slept peacefully in his arms, and his determination solidified. When Maria's small house finally appeared among the trees, a wave of relief swept over Elias. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that Maria was already awake. He knocked on the wooden door, the sound echoing in the morning silence. Maria opened the door, her eyes wide with surprise at seeing Elias with the bundle and the child. "Elias! What?" "Maria, I need your help," he said, his voice hoarse with fatigue and worry. "It's about the girl. I need to go back to the place where I found her. I need to look for clues, for something that can lead us to the truth. But I can't take her with me, and I can't leave her alone." Maria hesitated, her gaze fixed on the sleeping child. Worry creased her forehead. "Elias, this is dangerous. You know what can happen if someone finds out." "I know," he replied, his voice firm, "but I can't just ignore what happened. I can't ignore this child. She deserves justice. I need you to take care of her, just for a few hours. I'll be back as soon as possible." Maria sighed, but her eyes softened as she looked at the girl. "Come in, Elias. Of course I'll take care of her. But you need to be careful, very careful. Don't do anything reckless." Elias nodded, a lump of gratitude in his throat. He carefully handed the girl into Maria's arms. For a brief moment their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Maria was his only ally, his anchor in this sea of uncertainties. "Thank you, Maria. I'll be back before nightfall," he promised, turning towards the door. With a last look at the girl, now safe in Maria's arms, Elias left the house. The sun was already higher, and the forest seemed more alive. But for Elias, the path ahead was dark and full of dangers. He needed to find the truth, not just for the girl, but for himself. The crow's mission had become his own mission, a heavy burden, but one he was determined to carry to the end. He was a guardian, and the quest for justice was just beginning. Elias felt the weight of responsibility in every step he took back into the heart of the forest. The sun, now higher, filtered through the treetops, painting the ground with golden patches and dancing shadows. The air was warmer, but a shiver persisted down his spine. The image of the girl, safe in Maria's arms, was a beacon, guiding him through the dense vegetation. He needed to be quick, discreet, and above all, effective. The abandonment site was not far from his cabin, but with every meter traveled, the memory of that icy night and the cruel act became more vivid. He remembered the darkness, the silence broken only by the child's cry and the crow's caw. Now the forest seemed different, more alive, but the stain of that event remained, invisible to the eyes, but heavy on his soul. When he finally reached the clearing where everything had happened, Elias stopped. The place seemed unchanged, the same imposing trees, the same dense undergrowth, but now, in daylight, he could see details that the darkness and shock of the first time had obscured. He knelt, examining the ground. The damp, soft earth, covered with leaves and branches, was a record of every passing. His eyes scanned the perimeter. He remembered the car's make and color, a luxury model, unusual for those rustic roads. He looked for tire marks, but the previous night's rain and the occasional traffic of logging vehicles had erased most of the traces. However, in a more sheltered stretch, under the shadow of an ancient oak, he noticed something. There was a depression in the soil, deeper than usual, and a distinct pattern. It wasn't the track of a common truck tire. It was finer, more elegant. He knelt, running his fingers over the mark. It was faint but unmistakable. The car had been there. Elias stood up, his eyes scanning the area where the man had stopped. He remembered the tall figure, the dark clothes. What else could have been left behind? He walked slowly, examining every leaf, every stone. It was then that, near a blackberry bush, something faintly gleamed. It was a small metallic object, almost imperceptible among the dry leaves. Elias knelt again and picked it up. It was a brooch of a silvery metal with an intricate design, a small crest, perhaps of a family or a company. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, were the initials A.V. A shiver ran through Elias. It wasn't much, but it was something concrete, a name, or at least the initials of a name. A.V. He carefully put the brooch in his pocket, feeling the weight of the discovery. It wasn't a clue that could be taken to the police without seeming ridiculous, but for him, it was a thread, a beginning. He continued the search, more methodical now. He looked at the exact spot where the girl had been left. There was nothing else there, just the crushed grass and the painful memory. He wondered if the man had left anything else. Perhaps a note, an explanation, but found nothing. The cruelty of the act was even more evident in the absence of any justification. Suddenly, a familiar caw echoed above him. The crow, the same one that had guided him, landed on a nearby branch, watching him with its intelligent, dark eyes. Elias looked at the bird, a feeling of gratitude and complicity filling him. "You were right, my friend," he murmured. It wasn't a dream. The crow tilted its head, as if it understood. Its presence was a reminder that Elias was not alone in this mission. That bird, with its ancestral wisdom, was a link to the truth, a silent guardian. With the brooch in his pocket and the car's image etched in his mind, Elias knew he had enough for the moment. He needed to go back to Maria, to the girl. He needed to think, to plan the next step. The world out there, the world from which AV came, was a mystery to Elias, a man of the forest, but he was determined to unravel it. The quest for justice had just taken on a new and dangerous outline. He turned, leaving the clearing behind, but carrying with him the weight of a new hope and a silent promise. Elias ran back along the trail, the brooch heavy in his pocket, a mix of relief and apprehension stirring him. The sun was already high, and the forest's heat was stifling, but he felt no fatigue. The urgency to return to Maria, to share his discovery, propelled him. Every step was an echo of the promise made to the girl, a silent oath that the truth would come to light. When Maria's small house appeared again among the trees, Elias felt a lump in his throat loosen. He knocked on the door, and Maria opened it almost immediately, her face marked by worry. Seeing him, a sigh of relief escaped her lips. "Elias, thank God you're back. I was so worried," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "I found something, Maria," he replied, his voice hoarse. He entered, and Maria closed the door behind him. The girl was sleeping peacefully in a makeshift crib, a soft blanket wrapped around her. Elias took the brooch from his pocket and held it out to Maria. She took it, examining the intricate crest. "What is this, Elias?" It was there, near where she was left, and the tire marks. They weren't from a truck, it was a luxury car, and on the back it has the initials, AV. Maria's eyes widened, the brooch trembling slightly in her hands. AV, a crest. "Elias, this isn't something ordinary people have. This is from a rich family or a very large company." She frowned, thoughtful. "I have a cousin who works at the city's registry office. She knows all the important families, all the businesses. Maybe she can help us identify this crest, these initials." Elias nodded, hope igniting in his chest. "We need to be careful, Maria. We can't raise suspicion." "I know," she said, her voice firm. "I'll call her first thing tomorrow. I'll say I found the brooch and I'm trying to return it. She's discreet." Night fell over the forest, bringing with it a heavy silence. Elias and Maria discussed the plan in low voices while the girl slept. With each passing hour, Elias's determination grew stronger. The next morning, Maria made the call. Elias watched, his heart pounding. She spoke in a casual tone, but Elias could feel the tension in every word. After a few minutes, Maria hung up, her face pale. "She knows," Maria whispered. "The brooch belongs to the Vasconcelos family, one of the richest and most influential men in the region. His name is Arthur Vasconcelos. The initials match. He has a mansion on the outskirts of the city, and he's known for being, well, a ruthless businessman. Arthur Vasconcelos, the man who had abandoned his own daughter. We need to confront him," Elias said, his voice firm. "He needs to know that the truth has been discovered." Maria hesitated. "Elias, this is dangerous. He has power, influence. He might try to silence us." "We can't back down now, Maria. Not after everything, not for the girl." Maria looked at the child who had just woken up and was smiling at her. A heavy sigh escaped her lips. "You're right, but we can't go alone. I'll go with you, and we'll take the girl. He needs to see her." The journey to Arthur Vasconcelos' mansion was tense. Elias, with the girl nestled in his arms and Maria by his side, seemed like two strangers in the opulent world that opened before them. The mansion was imposing, surrounded by high walls and wrought iron gates. They were greeted by a butler who, reluctantly, led them to a luxurious living room. Arthur Vasconcelos entered moments later, a middle-aged man in an impeccable suit and with a cold, calculating gaze. His eyes widened slightly at seeing the girl in Elias's arms. "What is this?" he asked, his voice controlled, but with a hint of irritation. "Who are you, and what do you want in my house?" Elias stepped forward. "My name is Elias, and this is your daughter, Mr. Vasconcelos." He held out the brooch. I found this near her in the forest on the night you abandoned her." Arthur Vasconcelos's face paled, his eyes fixed on the brooch, then on the girl. A heavy silence filled the room. The girl, oblivious to the tension, babbled a soft sound. "This is absurd," Arthur exclaimed, recovering his composure, though his voice was slightly shaky. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen this child in my life." "Don't lie, Arthur," Maria intervened, her voice surprisingly strong. "Your cousin confirmed it to me. The brooch is yours, and the forest has eyes and ears. Elias wasn't alone that night." At that moment, a loud caw echoed from outside the open window. The crow landed on the windowsill, its dark eyes fixed on Arthur Vasconcelos like a silent judge. Arthur looked at the crow, then at Elias, at Maria, and finally at the girl. The facade of coldness began to crumble. The truth, naked and cruel, was there, undeniable. I had no choice," he murmured, his voice almost inaudible. "My reputation, my marriage. She was a mistake." "A mistake?" Elias said, his voice full of contempt. "She is a child, helpless. You left her to die." Elias's words hit Arthur like a blow. He staggered, his face contorted in a mixture of shame and despair. The image of his daughter, abandoned in the darkness, and now the living proof of his cruelty, was too much. The truth had been revealed. There was no violence, only the overwhelming force of exposure. Arthur Vasconcelos, the powerful man, was broken. In the days that followed, the story spread, not through newspapers, but through whispers and the indignation of Maria and Elias. Arthur Vasconcelos was forced to face the consequences of his actions, his reputation tarnished, his life turned upside down. Elias and Maria, in turn, found a new purpose. The girl, whom they named Aurora, found a home. Elias, the man of the forest, became her father, and Maria, her grandmother. Elias's cabin, once a solitary refuge, filled with laughter and the warmth of an unexpected family. The crow, the silent guardian, continued to visit the cabin, landing on the roof or a nearby branch, watching Aurora grow. Its mission was accomplished. Justice, in its peculiar way, had prevailed. The forest, witness to the abandonment, was now the cradle of new hope, a home for the girl who had been saved by the intervention of a crow and the heart of a truck driver. The final chapter was not one of vengeance, but of redemption and the miracle of a found family.